Namaskar and welcome to the Indology podcast, where we go deep on all things related to Bharatiya philosophy, itihas and dharma. Here we uncover ideas of great Indic thought leaders through their writings and where I read you excerpts from important Indic books. During the last few years, the words Hindu and Hinduism have been in the news as never before. All sorts of scholars, scribes and politicians who subscribe to what passes for secularism in this country have been after these two words with hammer and tongs. The words have been made to mean whatever happens to sound dirty or despicable to secularist ears. A brand new phrase, Hindu fundamentalism, has been coined and floated with great fanfare without any one of its happy hawkers caring to consult the commonest dictionary of the English language and finding out whether the word fundamentalism can at all be tacked to the word Hindu. The tribe of slogan shouters has simply forged ahead and equated Hindu fundamentalism with Nazism and fascism. Thus, it has become a free-for-all in which any word or phrase can mean anything and everything. Swearology has scored over sanity and lung power over logic. To understand why so much stigma is attached to these two terms, Hindus and Hinduism, we'll be taking the help of the great Shri Sitaram Goel, and I'll be reading you an excerpt from his book Hindus and Hinduism, Manipulation of Meanings, which was first published more than 30 years ago in 1993, but it has as much importance, as much value today as it did then. Sitaramji writes, one may wonder as to why Hindus and Hinduism are being portrayed in this puerile and perverted manner by the stalwarts of secularism in this country. The puzzle gets solved when one contemplates the character of Indian secularism and finds that it is no more than a smokescreen used by the Muslim, Christian, communist combine in order to keep India's national security and culture at bay. And one has to study the doctrines of Islam, Christianity and communism if one wants to understand as to why the adherents of these ideologies present Hindus and Hinduism the way that they do. They are simply projecting their self-image onto those whom they view as their enemies. It is difficult for Muslims and Christians and communists to believe that Hindus and Hinduism will not do to them what they have done or plan to do to Hindus and Hinduism. It is not unoften that civilized people become a nightmare for criminals and lunatics get scared by those who are sane. A more mischievous exercise has been going on for quite some time in some secularist circles. They have been not only setting the Buddhists and the Jains apart from the Hindus, but also asserting that Hinduism has always been at war with Buddhism and Jainism. While Hinduism has been increasingly identified with caste discrimination, social oppression, and Brahminical priestcraft, Buddhism and Jainism have been presented as humanitarian and rationalist revolts against it and in favor of equality and social justice. We therefore think it worthwhile to review the history of the words Hindus and Hinduism and determine what these words have meant, at what time, and to whom. This inquiry will also reveal the reason or the psychological process which has led our Hindus, by accident of birth, to place themselves squarely on the side of Muslim mujahids, Christian crusaders, and communist revolutionaries in exhibiting downright contempt for the people and the culture of this country. There is no running away from the fact that the word Hindu occurs for the first time in recorded history in the Avesta of the ancient Iranians, who used this word for designating this country as well as its people. They did not have to coin this word out of thin air. It was simply their way of pronouncing the word Sindhu, the name of the mighty river which has always been a major landmark for travelers to this country from lands toward the northwest. The word also spread to countries to the north and west of Iran. The ancient Greeks were quite familiar with the words Indus and Indoi, their way of pronouncing Sindhu and Sindhis. The ancient Arabs, Turks, Mongolians, and the Chinese were also familiar with the word. There is also evidence that at some stage in their history, the ancient Iranians started using the word Hindu in more than a purely descriptive sense. The word seems to have acquired for them a derogatory meaning as well. The Iranians are known to have become more hostile to the Hindus as Buddhism spread in Khorasan and Central Asia, and the temples dedicated to Dev were overshadowed by those dedicated to Buddh or Buddh, their name for the Buddha. By the time the Islamized Arabs appeared on the scene, the black-faced Hindu had become known to the Iranians as the Buddh-parast, worshipper of Buddh. In fact, the word Hindu had become synonymous with the word Buddh-parast in the Persian language, which had developed out of ancient Pahlavi. Every Hindu place of worship was now being described as well as despised as a Buddhkhana, house of the Buddh or Buddh. There were several other pejoratives which went with the word Hindu in Persian parlance. They have lived in Persian lexicons down to our own times. What is relevant in the present context is that the word Hindu had acquired a religious connotation prior to the Islamic invasions, although in the language of only the Iranians. It may be noted again that the Iranians show no knowledge of the fact that the worshippers of Dev and Buddh subscribe to so many ways of worship. For the Persians, all Hindus were Buddh-parast. Of course, the Arab soldiers of Allah and His Prophet did not have to depend on the Iranians for defining the Hindu as an idolater. They had known the Hindu as such for a long time, and they had their own patent word, mushrik, which the Quran had applied to the idolaters of Arabia, and which they continued to use in serious works on history and theology. But as the Islamized Arabs and Turks came to borrow heavily from Persian language and culture, they picked up the word Buddh-parast and started using it more and more frequently for the hated Hindu. In due course, this word came to predominate in the Islamic parlance vis-a-vis the people of this country. And what must have sounded painfully surprising as well as supremely profane to Iranian ears, the Muslims started using the word Atish-parast, or fire worshipper, for the worshippers of the Dev and the Buddh. Thus, in the lexicons of Islam, the Hindu stood defined and despised as the crow-faced kafir, the wicked mushrik, the blind Buddh-parast, and the accursed Atish-parast. The Muslim chronicles notice no Buddhists, no Jains, no Shaivs, no Shakt, no Vaishnavas, nor members of any other sect or subsect, neither at the beginning of Islamic conquests, nor during the period of Muslim rule, nor yet when Muslim domination draws towards its end. In all their narratives, all natives are attacked as Hindus, massacred as Hindus, plundered as Hindus, converted forcibly as Hindus, captured and sold in slave markets as Hindus, and subjected to all sorts of malice and molestation as Hindus. The Muslims never came to know, nor cared to know, as to which temple housed what idol. For them, all temples were Hindu Buddhkhanas to be desecrated or destroyed as such. They never bothered to distinguish the idol of one god or goddess from that of another. All idols were broken or burnt by them as so many Buddhs. All priests and monks, no matter to what school or order they belonged, were for the Muslims so many wicked Brahmins to be slaughtered or molested as such. In short, the word Hindu had acquired a religious connotation for the first time within the borders of this country. The credit for this turnout goes to the Muslim conquerors. With the coming of Islam to this country, all schools and sects of Sanatan Dharma had a common denominator: Hindu. The invaders noticed no Kshatriyas, no Vaishyas, no Shudra, or any other class or caste distinctions. The only people they singled out for special attention were the Brahmins, but it was not because they knew or recognized the Brahmins as a distinct caste. It was simply because the Brahmins were the mine of kufr and shirk, the misleaders of mankind, the greatest enemies of Allah and His Prophet, and the magicians who ensured that Hindus shall burn forever in the blazing fire of hell. Nor did the Muslim distinguish between high caste and low caste kafirs while killing them or converting them by force, or plundering their properties or capturing them, as well as their women and children for enslavement, or reducing them to the status of zimmis for imposing harsh disabilities and discriminatory taxes on them. In Muslim eyes, all natives constituted an undifferentiated society. But by the middle of the 14th century, the word Hindu had dropped the derogatory associations imposed on it by the Iranians and the Islamic invaders and acquired a lot of luster in the eyes of our own countrymen. Native heroes such as Maharana Kumbhakarna and Krishna Deva Rai, who defeated the Islamic onslaught, were hailed as Hindu heroes in subsequent centuries. Padmanabha uses the word Hindu for glorification of the Chauhan heroes of Jalore. It will not be long before Maharana Pratap of Mewad becomes renowned as Hindu Kul Kamala Divakara, that is the sun which brings bloom to the lotus that is the Hindu nation. Chhatrapati Shivaji, who turned back the tide of Islamic invasion and inaugurated the war of liberation from Islamic imperialism, will be hailed all over Bharatvarsh as the savior of Hindu Dharma and the protector of its significant symbols. So also Guru Gobind Singh and Maharaja Chhatrisal. And the word Hindu stood sanctified when Sanatana Dharma became known as Hindu Dharma. Numerous saint poets arose in all parts of Bharatvarsh who sang hymns in praise of Hindu Dharma and who reminded their countrymen that they were inheritors of a great and vast spiritual vision. The law of Islam threatened death to those who said that a religion other than Islam could also be true. But that did not deter Sant Kabir and Guru Nanak from proclaiming that Hindu Dharma was as good as Islam. Guru Tegh Bahadur defied the law of Islam at the very seat of its might and offered his head in defense of Hindu Dharma. Hindus survived the onslaught of Islamic imperialism and came out of it with renewed pride in their spiritual and cultural heritage. But the wounds inflicted by Islam on Hindu religion, culture, society, polity, economy and environment were pretty deep and needed time to heal. Hindus did not get that time because new forms of imperialism appeared on the scene in successive waves, while Hindus were still battling with the residues of Islamic imperialism. Christian imperialism, which had arrived in India at the beginning of the 16th century, received a new lease of life with the triumph of British arms by the end of the 18th. Hindus had to struggle very hard and on several fronts at the same time. They succeeded in blunting the edge of Christian imperialism to a large extent. They also succeeded in driving out the British, but they failed vis-à-vis the new Islamic offensive and had to surrender parts of their ancient homeland to a new wave of Islamic imperialism. And they have yet to see the end of the post-independence period, during which communist imperialism came on top in the form of Nehruvian secularism and heaped no end of humiliations on them. For it is during this period that the word Hindu became a dirty word, and Hinduism got equated with fascism and Nazism. What made the real big difference in favor of the new adversaries was the modern Western scholarship, which they mobilized for manipulating Hindu minds. In particular, they chose for a concentrated attack the two Hindu institutions which had been the mainstay of Hindu strength down the ages: the Brahmanas, who were the teachers of the Hindus and the custodians of Hindu Dharma, and the decentralized Hindu social organization, which had served them as their second line of defense whenever the Hindu state broke down under the impact of a foreign invasion. They ridiculed the Brahmins as practitioners of a puerile priestcraft designed to deceive the people, and they denounced the Hindu social organization as the caste system invented by the Aryan invaders in order to keep down the toiling masses. The Brahmins had been noticed by the very first foreign invader, Alexander the Macedonian adventurer. He wanted to know as to why the Indians had fought so bravely. He was told by his advisors that the Indians fought so well because they were guided by the Brahmins. He met some Brahmins and learnt the substance of their teaching. Centuries later, the Islamic invaders had also identified the Brahmins as the source of Hindu strength. They had killed as many Brahmins as they could and impoverished the rest by destroying Hindu temples and monasteries and schools, and by taking away the lands which provided livelihood to the Brahmins. Histories written by the medieval Muslim chroniclers are full of venom against the Brahmins, upon whom they hurl many invectives. But neither the Macedonian adventurer nor the Islamic invaders had spotted the second line of Hindu defense, the decentralized Hindu social organization. That was left to the Christian pirate Francis Xavier, who landed in Goa in 1542 CE and surveyed the scene in India for several years thereafter. At the end of his labors for converting India into a land of Christ with the help of Portuguese arms, he came to the conclusion that Christianity was not likely to make much headway in this country so long as Hindus had the Brahmins and the caste system to teach and protect them. Xavier's perceptions came to be shared by the latter-day imperialists operating in India, the Christian missions, the British administrators, and the communist fifth column. That is why they always made a common cause when attacking the common enemy, Hindu society, Hindu culture, and Hindu nationalism. Apologists of Islam and secularists of the Nehruvian brand have joined the ranks of these Hindu baiters and have been raising similar slogans against the Brahmins and the caste system. In fact, Nehruvian secularism embodies all imperialist ideologies that have come to this country in the wake of foreign invasions. The word Hindu was thus not only robbed of all the pride and prestige it had acquired over the past several centuries, but also made synonymous with crimes committed by foreign invaders against the indigenous people. At the same time, the word Hinduism was made to mean not only primitive superstition, but also an oppressive social system. The Dravidian South was taken out of the Hindu fold at one fell sweep and called upon to rise in revolt against everything Hindu. Hinduism now represented nothing more than Aryan imperialism in Dravidian eyes. Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism became revolts against Brahmanism, aka Hinduism. A brand new name, animism, was invented for tribal religions which had so far counted themselves as members of the Hindu Commonwealth of Faiths. Finally, Hinduism was compared to the boa constrictor which strangles all that fails to avoid its deadly embrace. The word Hindu no more designated the vast majority of the population in this country, and the word Hinduism no more stood for a vast spiritual vision and variegated cultural complex. This was the lore which was retailed in many a tome and treatise published by the prestigious publishing houses such as the Oxford University Press. This was the lore which was taught in school and college under an education system designed and controlled by the British establishment and the Christian missions. This was the lore which became the stock in trade of the Communist Party of India and the Muslim League. And this was the lore by mouthing which a section of the Indian National Congress started strutting around as progressive, radical, revolutionary, socialist, and the rest under the leadership of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. The situation for Hindus and Hinduism started worsening after Pandit Nehru rose to supreme power in the Congress and the country at large after the death of Sardar Patel. One has to read his writings and speeches and evaluate his policies from the Hindu point of view in order to realize that so far as Hindus and Hinduism are concerned, he was a combined embodiment of all the imperialist ideologies that have flooded this country in the wake of foreign invasions or interventions: Islam, Christianity, white man's burden, and communism. And by the time he assumed command, he represented a sizable and powerful class of self-alienated Hindus, which had started taking shape during Muslim rule and had multiplied fast under the British dispensation. Pandit Nehru's first opportunity to strike a blow at Hindus and Hinduism came when Gandhi was murdered by a Hindu in January 1948. He and his brigade, inside and outside the Congress, sprang into action as never before. Ostensibly, they were attacking the Hindu Mahasabha and the RSS, but their real target was Hindu society and Hinduism. They were out to make a political use of the national tragedy and were more than cynical in doing so. Pandit Nehru had never had any use for Mahatma Gandhi except as a shield against what he described as the reactionary forces inside the Congress. Now he saw the light going out and yet showing the path for the future. It is significant that he never quoted the Mahatma except on the question of Hindu-Muslim unity. The Communist Party of India was revising its line under orders from Moscow and had already started denouncing the Mahatma as the cleverest bourgeois scoundrel. But on the marrow of the Mahatma's murder, the party's press was reminding the people that the Mahatma had not died a natural death, but had been murdered, and accusing a whole array of persons and organizations of a conspiracy to get him out of the way. Even the Muslim leaders, who had all along abused the Mahatma as an enemy of Islam, were shedding crocodile tears and issuing calls for all nationalist forces to get together in order to beat back the march of communalist elements. The tragedy had come handy to all those who wanted to put the Hindus against the wall and blacken Hinduism. The murder of Gandhi has never been understood or presented in a correct and concrete perspective. Suffice it to say that the Mahatma had fallen a victim to his own follies vis-à-vis the Muslims and Islam, and that Nathuram Godse was no more than an instrument of history which had taken a terrible revenge. In any case, people who were not Hindus by birth or inclination had no business to poke their nose in what was essentially a feud within the Hindu fold. After all, it was the Hindus who had rallied around the Mahatma and stood by him through thick and thin. They had the right to feel infuriated with the leader who had betrayed the trust they had placed in him and thrown them to the wolves. Gandhi was assuring the Hindus till the last moment that the country could be divided only over his dead body, but all of a sudden he threw up his hands and advised the Hindus to follow the leaders who had accepted partition. He was now showing greater concern for Muslims inside India than for the Hindus left to the mercies of the butchers in Pakistan, and he was blackmailing with a fast unto death the only Congress leader, Sardar Patel, who had the courage to stand by the Hindus. There should be no doubt that in the months following partition, Gandhi was the most hated man so far as the Hindu masses were concerned. The price he paid for the great betrayal was only a signal that the Hindus were not yet dead. The murder of the Mahatma is still being used by Hindu baiters as a stick for beating the Hindus. Communist and Muslim scribes are never tired of describing the Sangh Parivar as Godse's descendants. The fault in the ultimate analysis lies with Hindu leaders and organizations for letting this black brood get away with its dirty tricks. Hindu leaders and organizations have been taking fright as soon as Mahatma's murder is mentioned. They have failed to see the design of anti-Hindu forces and defeat it once for all by putting the record straight. The behavior of Hindu leaders was no different at the time the tragedy took place. Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee deserted the Hindu Mahasabha and joined the Congress.
WhatsApp and Telegram
The RSS stood
channels.
totally confused
I thank
and
you all for listening
demoralized,
to this
and when Hindu
podcast.
politics
Until the next time, I
emerged
see you.
in 1951, the
Vande
word Hindu
Mataram.
was replaced with the word Bharatiya in the name of the new Hindu party, the Bharatiya Jansangh. The only saving feature was that the saffron colour had been retained unpolluted in the party's flag. Pandit Nehru hounded out or silenced everyone in the Congress whom he suspected of having some Hindu feeling or sympathy for some Hindu cause. He saw to it that no quarter was given to the Hindu Mahasabha and the RSS. He objected to every Hindu symbol in India's public life. The country had been partitioned by the remnants of Islamic imperialism, but he blamed it on communalism, a word by which he always meant Hinduism. In every letter that he wrote to the chief ministers in the provinces, he ordered them to be vigilant about communal elements, meaning Hindu organizations. The RSS response to this offensive was to flaunt the word Bharatiya in the name of every front it floated. The word Hindu had become something shameful in the eyes of the foremost Hindu organization. The situation remains the same today. Pandit Nehru placed the strategic Ministry of Education in the hands of the Marxist-Muslim combine headed by an Islamic fundamentalist, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. The Christian missions were given full facilities to expand their network, to educate the Hindu elite into more and more self-alienation, and to convert as many Hindus as they could manage. The missionary apparatus, which had panicked when it saw the British Raj drawing to an end, was feeling self-confident again. Indira Gandhi carried her father's anti-Hindu program much farther. She was not a communist like her father. In fact, she had no ideology except that of using everything and everyone for building her personal power. But for a long time, the Communist Party of India proved to be her most reliable prop. She split the Congress Party and placed well-known communists in positions of power in the government of the centre as well as the states. The Jawaharlal Nehru University was created and financed on a fabulous scale for collecting communist professors from all over the country. It was not long before an all-out campaign was launched for fighting communalism, that is, Hinduism, and promoting secularism, that is, Islam. By now the word secularism had become a sacred word which nobody was allowed to question as regards its meaning. The meaning had to be accepted ex cathedra and as defined by the Marxist Muslim combined. In the new parlance that emerged, Hinduism was blackened as communalism. Small wonder that the word Hindu started becoming a dirty word in the academia as well as the media. The Sikhs had already opted out of the Hindu fold, and their scholars were saying that Sikhism was closer to Islam and Christianity than to Hinduism. The Jains started saying more and more loudly that they were not Hindus. The climax came when the Ramakrishna Mission petitioned the Calcutta High Court and obtained a decree to the effect that it was not a Hindu organization. The lawyers who argued the mission's case stated that Sri Ramakrishna could not be a Hindu because he had felt like eating beef. A section of the Arya Samaj was also distancing itself from the Hindu fold. It was saying that the Arya Samajists were Hindus without Hinduism. An article in the constitution which gave certain concessions to non-Hindu educational institutions was cited by these turncoats in defense of their treachery. The real reason, however, was that nobody who thought of himself as somebody was prepared to be known as Hindu anymore. The word Hindu had become a dirty word. The situation became much worse after the Janata Party came to power in 1977. By now, the BJS, the Bharatiya Jan Sangh, which was a partner in the Janata Combine, had been taken over by a known Nehruvian, and those who had objected to the coup had been hounded out. The BJS was mortally afraid of being known as a Hindu organization, except privately and in whispers, and was frequently flaunting its Muslim membership in order to prove its secularist credentials. The RSS itself had invited every known secularist to use its various platforms for speaking on the sanctified subject. The tragedy of the BJS and the RSS, however, was that no authentic secularist was prepared to concede their claims. Both of them continued to be suspected as being Hindu communalist organizations. The secularists in the Janata Party, therefore, had only to raise an accusing finger to throw its BJS component on the defensive. The climax came when the secularists in the Janata Party asked the BJS to sever its relations with the RSS, and the RSS itself to drop the word Hindu from its constitution. The leaders of the Bharatiya Jan Sangh group in the Janata Party raised no objection to the dictatorial demand. The RSS also became ready to consider the proposal in its next general body meeting. One wonders how things would have turned out if the Janata Party regime had not fallen before the critical RSS session could be held. The situation was saved not by the Hindu leaders, but by outer events. A more shameful slide took place when the Bharatiya Jan Sangh reincarnated itself as the Bharatiya Janata Party, under the leadership of the known Nehruvian. The ideology of the new party was Gandhian socialism, whatever that meant. The flag of the BJP was now displaying the green colour of Islamic jihad, along with the saffron colour of Hindutva. And the leaders of the BJP could be heard saying more and more frequently that they could no more afford to be known as Hindus. Ab apne ko Hindu kehne se kaam nahi chalega. That was the situation when there were some signs of Hindu unrest at the doings of Islam in India. Islam was now flush with petrodollars and on the offensive once more. The RSS, BJS leaders have been quick to take credit for what they call Hindu awakening, but that is dishonest. They can take credit only for using that unrest in their search for political power. The Hindu unrest itself has arisen in spite of them, and it is yet too early to call it a Hindu awakening. It is difficult to say how things will take shape. The only thing that can be said for sure is that India has no future till the words Hindu and Hinduism regain the pride that rightfully belongs to them, and the word secularism is seen for the poison it carries in its Nehruvian version. It is time for Hindu scholarship to see through the manipulations which have made the words Hindu and Hinduism sound dirty. Once again, the book that I was narrating the excerpt from is called Hindus and Hinduism, Manipulation of Meanings by Shri Sitaram Goel. And as always in his writings, a lot of history, a lot of facts have been revealed, a lot of new ideas have been given, and an incredible analysis of the post-independent situation of the Hindus has been done. I would urge all of you to pick up this little book. It is not very long. You can finish reading it in about an hour. So please read this book. It is available online for free. I assure you that after you are done reading this book, you'll have an incredible amount of clarity and knowledge about these issues that persist even today. And with this, we come to the end of this episode of the Indologia podcast. If you liked it, then please give me a 5-star rating on Apple Music, Spotify, whichever platform you are listening to this on. You should also follow me on the social medias, on Instagram and Twitter, where I post many, many more updates and a lot of my sarcastic commentary looking at the world from a Hindu civilizational perspective. The name is the same everywhere. It's Indologia, Indologia. Until the next time I see you, Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.